Now, after the death of Jezebel and so forth, you don't get the same stability, you don't get dynastic stability anymore in the Northern Kingdom, and things go from bad to worse, and eventually the Assyrians come in. Why did the Assyrians come in?
Are you asking the Assyrians, or are you asking the history? Are you asking the Bible?
Well, you get two different answers.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so the biblical text tells us, and there's no surprise here because this is what it's all been building to.
Yeah.
Right. This is 2 Kings 17. I think is really like the Deuteronomistic historian's shining moment. This is the text in which everything he's been working for the entire time really comes to fruition. Yeah. And he gets to say, it was the sin of Jeroboam, or the establishing of non-Jerusalem sanctuaries and the worshiping of foreign deities and all the things that were wrong. And what's the result? The result is exile, right? It's exactly what Deuteronomy had been advocating for and suggesting was going to happen. It's he couldn't have asked for a better outcome than to be able to look at the north and say, you got exactly what was going to come. And what's more, and this is my favorite part, and it happened because you didn't heed all of the prophets who came and told you. Right? Throughout the Deuteronomy, throughout the history, the historian has been throwing into the story these various prophetic figures who come in and say, but just remember, obey the Torah and don't worship foreign deities and worship in the right way. And I mean, these characters that the historian seems to have created, or at least used, to get his message across. And now here, the Northern Kingdom falls, and it's the great "I told you so" chapter of the Bible, I think.
Yeah. What happens then in the Northern Kingdom itself, in Samaria? What happens after, when the leadership is all carted off to Assyria? Are we left with an empty land?
There are parts of the Bible that have you think so.
Yeah.
Certainly, that's true for the second wave of exile, which is going to come. But the answer is no. There's never an empty land. There are Israelites, and I mean here Israelites like the northern Israel Israelites, who remain. There are for sure Assyrians who are brought in. That's part of Assyria's policy, imperial policy, is to do some exiling, right? We're going to do some forced removal, and we're going to do some probably forced, implantation of non-natives, to do some governing, to do some administering, and also just to settle the land.
Now, in the telling of the Deuteronomistic history, are there any true Yahwists left in the Northern Kingdom?
Of course not. Of course not.
And this now becomes a hugely controversial thing later on, because in fact, there is still a community on Mount Gerizim or Shechem or around there. Very small community by now, but at one time there were a flourishing community who were quite dedicated to the worship of Yahweh and who amazingly accepted the Torah. Mm-hmm. Later on, their own version of it a little bit, but still basically the same thing. And so these get a very bad rap right from the beginning.
Right, which is why it is surprising to say things in other texts like a good Samaritan.
Yes, yes, paradox.
Right,
contradiction in terms.
But I mean, so what's at stake here, and it's not just here. It's actually for almost the rest of the Bible. What's at stake is, do you have to have experienced exile in order to be an Israelite?
Yeah.
And I mean, that, who knows? I don't get to set the rules of how we define a true Israelite. At a certain point, it's circumcision and it's Passover and it's worship of Yahweh. If at a certain point later it becomes also went into exile, I can't tell them that's wrong, but there are certainly people who will say, you changed the rules on me.
Another issue there, I think, is the idea that all Israelites were descended from Jacob. Mm-hmm. They were all actually related to each other. So you bring in a group of settlers, can they become Israelites? At this point in history, I think, no. Later on, they will allow for conversion. But at this point in history, I don't think that was regarded as an option.
Right.
Now, of course, In fact, I would think in every period of history, there were some people coming in and getting absorbed and some shifting in the makeup of the population. But that, that's still held against the people in Assyria there. A lot of people from the Northern Kingdom just went south. This is the time when Jerusalem expanded.
Right, there's this wonderful archaeological evidence. I mean, if you go to Jerusalem, you can see, right, like the new walls that they had to build because the city got too big.
Yeah, and then they also brought their traditions with them.
Yeah.
And it's really after this that you're going to get people in the Southern Kingdom paying serious attention to the law of Moses. Now, the king at the time when most of them went south, in all probability at least, was Hezekiah. Hezekiah comes off as one of only two good kings in the whole history.
At least one of two, only two great kings.
Hezekiah. But if you mind open,
I mean, Hezekiah is one of the two, and Josiah will be the other, who is said to be as good as David, right, which is at this point relatively high praise.
And what did he do?
So, I mean, Hezekiah, it depends, right? Hezekiah gets credit for a lot of things. There's probably there's an element of reform, religious reform. Josiah will come along and do more, but Hezekiah seems to have started some of this. There's a move towards centralizing worship, it would seem. And there's actually, archaeologically, there's an argument about whether it's Josiah or Hezekiah to which we should attribute, right, like the centralization of the cult in Jerusalem.
In fact, I've even heard it argued that we should really attribute it to the Assyrians.
Right.
Because when Sennacherib came through, when Hezekiah rebelled and Sennacherib came through and shut up Hezekiah in Jerusalem like a bird in a cage, he had probably burned down most of the other shrines around the country.
Yeah, it's either they were destroyed by the Sennacherib in the invasion, or Hezekiah, recognizing the invasion was coming, like essentially pulled in all of, again, remembering that all of these sanctuaries are economic hubs, right? If we pull all that stuff into Jerusalem, we can preserve and maintain. We're maybe getting ahead of ourselves. Hezekiah is credited in the Bible with collecting proverbs. There are a lot of the prophetic books seem to have some tie to or a collection in the time of Hezekiah.
Well,
also.
Isaiah was there.
Isaiah's
there. At this point, a lot of the prophecies of Isaiah seem to be related to Hezekiah.
Yeah,
perhaps.
Yeah, so there's reason to think that at least at the time of Hezekiah was one of sort of a flourishing, literary flourishing, perhaps, seems to be the case.
And the big thing was Jerusalem did not get destroyed.
Right, so we should talk about Sennacherib and how this happens, because we throw away around the term Sennacherib like it's nothing, but who are we talking about when we talk about Sennacherib?
Well, we're talking about a great Assyrian king who led his army west, destroyed everything around, and besieged Jerusalem. And you've got to figure that he could have taken it if he really wanted to.
But why doesn't he? Because here's another place where our stories differ depending on who you ask.
Who you ask? Well, the story you get in the Bible, in the book of Kings, is the angel of the Lord came down and slew, 80,000 people in the camp of the Assyrians. Mm-hmm. And when they awoke in the morning, they were all dead.
And when you read when the Assyrians tell the story, what do they say?
They say that Hezekiah scraped the gold off the walls of the temple, gave all his daughters to the Assyrians. They more or less cleaned the place out.
And which one do you think is right?
Well, I suspect, I think the Assyrian one, I have no reason to doubt. The other one is surely exaggerated. There might be something to it. Maybe there was a plague or something.
Yeah.
Maybe he had some reason. I heard a rumor from his own land that he wanted to get back home and take care of business.
Yeah. My sense is the truth is probably lies very much in the middle.
Yeah.
I don't trust the biblical account because it's absurd, and I don't trust the Assyrian account because it's also too much.
Yeah.
But I would have no doubt that there was some tribute paid, which is all they wanted in the first place, right? Like when the Assyrians come through, What they really want is for you to sort of pledge your fealty and pledge pledge tribute, and then they leave you alone. My assumption is, I mean, it seems clear, Assyria had been powerful before Sennacherib came through. I assume that tribute was being paid regularly. The rebellion of Hezekiah is, I'm going to stop doing it.
Yeah.
And in the end, was Hezekiah's rebellion a good thing, a bad thing?
Its effect on Judah must have been somewhat like the effect of this attack by Hamas on Gaza.
Right.
It backfires, and it leads to almost total destruction of your own people. And so I think in the short term, it was surely a bad thing. But it's remembered as a great thing.
But theologically,
the inviolability of Zion.
Exactly. Theologically, the rebellion, it's not the rebellion, but it's the fact that Jerusalem is preserved while everything else is destroyed that really is central in the foundation of this long-standing biblical theological position, as the Zion theology, whatever you want to call it.
And it will come back to haunt Jerusalem in the time of the Babylonians.
Indeed, which is only a few chapters later in the story.
We should say something, I suppose, about Josiah, although he probably gets discussed when we discuss Deuteronomy. But now, his main accomplishment, first of all, coming to the throne very young, seems to have been a great plus. Maybe other people made the decisions. But then they find the book of the law of the Lord.
Do they?
What do you think of it? Yes.
Do they? I mean, so, is the very common, nearly, 250-year-old now scholarly consensus that the book that is found in the time of Josiah is not the Torah as we now have it, but it rather is sort of the core of Deuteronomy. And part of the reason for that is that the story we have in Kings has Josiah centralizing worship, just like Deuteronomy wants, and getting rid of all the high places and all the foreign influence.
Clean out the temple.
Right. Now, it's not entirely clear to me that we should be taking the story in Kings at face value and therefore saying, oh, then it must have been Deuteronomy. What we have is two texts that are working in tandem. Right? We've got a Deuteronomy that says you should do this, and we have a history that says, this is what our favorite king did because he found the text. I'm not sure I buy any of it. At the same time, it is clear that there is a link between the two things.
But now, one of the intriguing things, though, about Deuteronomy is that in many ways it seems to be a northern book. There's nothing in it explicitly about Jerusalem. You have to fill in the place that the Lord has chosen. And some people would say, well, the Samaritans filled it in differently.
Right.
But when they talk about places, it's Shechem and Shechem and Mount Ebal and so forth. So could it be that some of the northern refugees brought some of this stuff with them?
It's definitely possible. It's definitely possible.
I would think that the one bit they're not likely to have brought with them is the idea of the centralization in one location. Which is the main thing that Josiah seems to be eager to implement. And
there are people who will tell you that Deuteronomy. It's not that Josiah was influenced by Deuteronomy. That the Deuteronomy rather is
influenced by Josiah.
Is sort of the literary expression of Josiah's program. That it's people use the phrase pious forgery, right? It was created as oh, look what we found, this very old book, which is a common move. I'm not sure I agree with either.
There's a lot of stuff in Deuteronomy that doesn't relate directly to Josiah's program. I would suspect, they took some old traditions. Now, they may not have found them in the temple, but some older traditions, which then kind of lend credibility to the whole enterprise.
So what's strange about Josiah is that he is clearly lauded as the greatest of the kings since David, and also the kingdom of Judah collapses within a couple of generations of him.
And he himself gets killed.
And he gets killed.
And the way they deal with that is the Lord in his mercy took him away so that he wouldn't see what was going to happen to Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And Jerusalem was really destroyed because of the sins of Manasseh. But there I think we have to leave it probably for today
Okay.
on that.